When my book first came into Barnes & Noble, I was waiting to see where they were going to put it. Were they going to put it under history? What were they going to put it under? It was very interesting. They put it under current events, and they were right. Because, as I just said earlier, what's happening now is exactly what was happening in '92, but at a smaller scale. But you guys didn't know about it. Now you've seen what goes on in Congress. You've watched the whole sausage-making process of the health care reform. You have much more information than we did at that time. But it's the exact same problems, but worse. So nothing's changed. The good news is you have the internet, and you have all cable, and you have all these other things, which weren't around in '92. The internet, I got on in '93, but it really didn't catch on probably till 2000. I think that's when it really caught on. And by the way, remember where that came from? The Defense Department? So they're cutting back on a lot of areas like NASA and everything today. A lot of this stuff, the cell phone, all that came out of NASA. So people don't realize that when he's cutting back on things like that, he's actually cutting back on creativity and innovation. That's one of my problems with, I have a section in my show called Pat's Political Pet Peeves. That comes up a lot, obviously. Okay, I jotted down some of the issues that we addressed then that we're still facing today. The national debt and deficit, increasing illegal immigration, the broken healthcare system, which as far as I'm concerned is still broken, an education system that's not working, the impact of economic globalization on jobs in the U.S. economy, and elected representatives who don't listen to the people that elected them. This is in the book. That was the basis of the whole Perot movement, and guess what? Sounds the same, doesn't it? So the book is a history, but it's also, you can look at it from the perspective of what's really happening today. And the other piece I think that the book has in it that's interesting is that it shows when people rise up, and today we've got the Tea Parties and all this other group, what the Republicans and Democrats will do to destroy you, to make sure that you don't get your foot in the door and that you don't succeed. And the last chapter of the book talks about how to do that. How do you avoid? See, the Tea Party's mistake is they came out too strong too early, just like we did. And so what happened is they immediately got infiltrated by the Republican Party, and I don't blame them. I mean, if I was in a party, I'd have done the same thing. I live in Cherry Hill, and there was a movement called the 9/12 movement. That's Glenn Beck. It's similar to the Tea Party. And so I went to the first meeting, and at the first meeting, there were 150 people showed up. And out of the 150, I'm going to say half were independents. The next one, those half didn't show up because the Republicans had already stepped in. They wanted to endorse candidates. This is the Tea Party, which is what they're doing. So they're not an issues organization. And I've talked to people all over the country to try to get a feel for what's going on. And in most places, the Tea Party is being taken over by the Republicans. I mean, you have Dick Armey from Texas who's saying he's the founder now, which of course he isn't. But in terms of a political party, you have to be careful about how you start and not rush. And actually, I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing that the media didn't show up here, because you don't want them knowing too much at the beginning. I know it's hard for you guys to recruit because of that, but you have to be very careful. You're walking a fine line. Okay. A lot of questions I get is, why did I write the book? I was so angry when Pat Buchanan took over in 2000. I basically dropped out. But I couldn't forget all the things that had happened. We tried to start another organization in 2002 called United We Stand, which I think I mentioned was anti-terrorism. It was after the Twin Towers. Perot put money in. We had a convention, 38 states showed up. The government found out about it. They invited me and Donna Donovan, who happens to be the editor of the book, down to Washington to talk about this whole organization. And they sat there with pen and paper, didn't say two words, took notes on everything we had to say, and then destroyed us. Went after all the people in the various states, and we were told it's not up to the people to do this, it's up to the government to protect you. So after that happened, that was probably in 2004, it brought back all the stuff that had taken place in the 90s. And I was angry at the media, and to use a cliche, I wanted to set the record straight, because the media had not showed what was true, number one, who truly Ross Perot is. And let me tell you something, he's not God. I didn't join the movement because of Ross Perot, I joined because of issues. But what you see is what you get. The guy obviously made money, which means he wasn't perfect, right? He's a businessman, we know what that means, but that's okay. But he had these other skills, and he talks about it, and I talk about it in the book. He truly asked the question, what's good for the country? Before, for example, he has problems with the debt and the deficit. He has problems with the health care bill because he doesn't think it solves the problem. So, and he really believes this and is really like this. And, by the way, he's not arrogant. If you start talking to him, he will listen and change his mind. He's a superb listener. And if he gets but if you come in and you don't have facts, and we can talk about Sarah Palin, and you don't have facts, forget it. He'll hang up on you and never talk to you again. And he won't tell you that. He won't say to you, well, I'm never going to talk to you again, or argue with you. That's the end of we're done. So they never really, and the media saw it. They saw the real person. But what they did, and remember you guys were talking about they wanted no one to come, they just wanted you to write a summary of what took place here?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what they did in the 90s, and it's less today, I think. But in the 90s, what they did is they listened to the Republicans, the Democrats. Clinton was superb at this. He sent out every day, he'd send out another PR piece, and so they didn't have to do any investigating or go out after their own information. It was just a lot easier to copy down all this stuff. So you didn't get a true picture of what was really taking place. And in the first chapter, maybe it's the second, I talk about, did Ross Perot drop out in 1992? And the answer is no. And you would never have known that. What happened was, he never declared that he was a candidate for president. He went on Larry King and said, if people get me on the ballot in 50 states, I'll run. The 50th state got him on in September 1992. So he wasn't a declared candidate till the beginning of October. So when the media decided he was the candidate and he was running, and yes, he went for interviews and he talked, and because he promised the people he would do it if they got him on, and they were getting him on. But that summer in July, when they said he dropped out, there were 26 states to go. The other thing that he does, that because he's better now than he used to be, he wasn't great with the media because he was too honest, is he was just talking about what the Republicans and Democrats were doing at that time. And he had a problem with the way the Republicans were presenting themselves, and just talked about the fact that Democrats seemed to have a better handle on what was happening in the country. They took that to mean he wasn't right. And the reason you also had Admiral Stockdale as the vice presidential candidate is because he wasn't supposed to be. He was a stand-in until Perot found out what the rules are in every state, and by the time September 26th came along, you couldn't take him off the ballot. It was too late in most of the states. So he left him in. So that's how Stockdale went out, but he never dropped out. And what you'll see is a lot of people, a lot of state parties believed the media and started shutting down. Meanwhile, Perot's still sending in money to keep everything open. He's funding the signatures. How could he be dropping out and putting his money out to pay for people to go out and get signatures all over the country? Doesn't make sense. So he did not drop out. If you ever hear that again, please tell them you heard it from someone that was there. Ross Perot did not drop out in 92. He simply didn't. And the media got a hold of it because they didn't want him to win. So that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. Take a look at the bottom of this sheet, Methods of Influencing the Government. There are 3 quotes by Jefferson. Those are the other 3 reasons